Hello and welcome to China Tonight. Back for another season. I'm Stan Grant. On the program, is China the key to the Ukraine conflict? Also tonight, the centuries-old practice of fortune-telling and just what happened with the PM's missing WeChat account. But first, the latest news from China. And Yvonne Yong joins me now. Yvonne, we'll come to the war in Ukraine in a moment. First, though, China's top legislature, the National People's Congress, has held its annual meeting over the weekend. It's one of the biggest events in the political calendar, and the headline announcement was a financial boost to what's already the world's biggest military force.
Yes, Stan, China's military spending is second only to the US, but Beijing is closing the gap. And gathered in the Great Hall of the People on Saturday, China's lawmakers endorsed a plan to increase defence spending by 7.1%.
面深化练兵备战，坚定灵活开展军事斗争，捍卫国家主权、安全、发展利益。
And Premier Li Keqiang also reaffirmed China's commitment to reunification with Taiwan, which Beijing has threatened to annex by force if necessary.
He did stand. China has increased military activity near the island over the past 2 years. Premier Li pledged to advance peaceful relations with Taiwan, but also warned China firmly opposes any move towards a formal declaration of independence. Meanwhile, Australia's Defence Minister Peter Dutton has stepped back from an earlier prediction that Australia would join a conflict to defend Taiwan.
You said in November, Minister, that it would be inconceivable that we wouldn't support the US in an action over Taiwan. Is that still your view?
Well, David, if it's in our national interest to protect our homeland and our allies, then we would take that decision at that time as to what was in our country's best interest.
And while Premier Li Keqiang stressed economic uncertainty would not slow China's efforts to modernise its military, the economic outlook is tight.
New economic growth targets announced on the weekend were the lowest in 30 years. China says it's aiming for 5.5% this year, comfortably higher than Australia's, but that's a pretty modest target for China.
今年，我国发展面临的风险挑战明显增多，必须爬坡过坎。越是困难，越要坚定信心，越要真抓实干。我国经济长期向好的基本面不会改变。
But some economists say even meeting the reduced GDP target may be difficult. China, like much of the world, faces energy shortages, but it's also grappling with a cooling property sector and is persisting with its COVID-0 strategy. Stan.
Well, the elephant in the room, or bear perhaps, the conflict in Ukraine, did not get a mention in the Premier's address at the Congress.
No, Russia's invasion of Ukraine wasn't mentioned at all. China has consistently called for negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, but has not condemned the invasion. Instead, Beijing has criticised Western-led sanctions against Moscow and lent weight to Russia's claim that its security is threatened by NATO's expansion.
北约连续5轮东扩的情况下，俄罗斯在安全方面的正当诉求理应得到重视。 和妥善解决。
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken held a phone call with his Chinese counterpart over the weekend, telling him the world is watching to see which nations stand up for the basic principles of freedom, self-determination and sovereignty. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi, meanwhile, reiterated Beijing's stance that the conflict should be resolved through diplomacy, saying China will continue to speak out and do its best for peace.
Now, while Ukraine might not have been top of the agenda at the National People's Congress, it was what people were talking about on social media.
Well-known television host Jin Xing had her Weibo account suspended, actually, after she called Vladimir Putin a crazy man and expressed support for Ukraine on the platform. Responses to the punishment were mixed.
She is an adult who should be responsible for what she speaks and acts. Besides, she is a public figure.
This society can only accept obedient children.
And an idea raised by EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell also sparked considerable interest. The hashtag China Response to EU, saying only China can act as mediator, got over 160 million clicks. That's nonsense, said one person. The US and the EU can just stop sending weapons and the problem will be solved soon. while another said China is very busy. Our country is hosting the Olympics and citizens are reflecting. Please don't call us. Thank you.
Yvonne, thank you. So what is China's role in the Ukraine conflict? The recent Beijing Winter Olympics saw a full display of the close relationship between the two leaders, but it's a history full of contradictions. Dinner and a show. Putin and Xi's date on the eve of the Winter Games included an announcement they wanted the world to hear.
也一定会我们两国关系注入新的活力动力。
The 5,000-word statement declared their no-limits support for one another and demanded the West end its Cold War mentality.
Что касается наших двусторонних отношений, то они развиваются действительно поступательно. Они приобрели действительно беспрецедентный характер.
Putin pledged Moscow's support for Beijing's One China policy and its claim to Taiwan. Both leaders expressed serious concerns about AUKUS and demanded an end to NATO expansion.
The Cold War has been long gone. NATO was a product of the Cold War era, and now we need to look at the current situation, and there needs to be adaptation to NATO.
The response from world leaders was swift.
They seek a new era, as they say, to replace the existing international rules.
If anybody's guilty of a Cold War mentality right now, it's China and Russia, not the West, not the United States.
The pact pledged more trade and energy deals, collaboration on space, climate change and artificial intelligence, and heralded both countries as successful democracies.
I think it is a manifesto for their global leadership. They are stepping forward in a big way.
It was the 38th time the two leaders had met since 2013. Putin described Xi as his best friend, while Xi says their strategic cooperation is unshakable, past, present and future. It's a far cry from Mao Zedong's visit to Moscow in 1949. Expecting to be praised for delivering China to communism, he was instead humiliated by Joseph Stalin, who made him wait hours for a meeting. What followed was an uneasy alliance. By the 1960s, Communist China and Soviet Russia were openly feuding over leadership differences, and by 1969 were embroiled in a 7-month battle over disputed border territory. The collapse of the Soviet Union heralded a new era of cooperation, culminating in the two countries signing a treaty of friendship in 2001. By 2010, China was Russia's single biggest trading partner, last year reaching a record high of $147 billion. China's response to Russia's 2008 war in Georgia was ambivalent. And when Russia was hit with sanctions after its 2014 annexation of Crimea, China helped Russia by signing a $400 billion gas deal. China has grown rich and Russia has grown powerful. They both believe the West has grown weak. The question is, will they or can they be stopped? Qinduo Xu is a political analyst and senior fellow at the Pangol Institution, a Beijing-based public policy think tank. He's also the host of the CGTN discussion program Dialogue, and he joins me now. Qinduo, good to have you with us. We don't hear a lot at the moment about what people on the ground in China are saying and thinking about the conflict in Ukraine. What are you hearing?
Basically, you see, you can divide the people into two groups. On one hand, you have people who are strong with Putin, with Russia. They understand Russia. Probably they are more supportive of the Russian, not exactly action. They are more about, anti the Western, for example, NATO expansion. They understand that. So they have more sympathy with the Russian action. On the other hand, you have people, mostly, I would say, intellectuals and also women, let's say. The Chinese side, they would say, certainly it is completely wrong for Russia to invade Ukraine. There's nothing to discuss or to dispute about that. It's simply the wrong action for Russia to do that.
And are we seeing a lot of this public discussion as well? You have your various social media sites. Is this really engaging the public openly?
Oh, it's people are going crazy, on Weibo, that's public, and also on WeChat. We have WeChat groups. Inside the group could be like 500 people, 300 people. So people have different opinions. Even inside a particular family or among friends, now people are getting really fired up. I have a friend, basically there's a couple. So husband is with Russia, the wife is with Ukraine. They had quarreled 3 times. And they tried to persuade the other side, but of course they failed. So this country is getting divided because of the Ukraine crisis.
So Chindwa, how does that then sit with the public position, the government position? Are people pushing back against that? They're criticising that? How does that sit with a relationship between China and Russia that is so much more close?
Interestingly, people are basically debating with each other. At the same time, I think most people, they understand the government position. That is very careful. On one hand, you have traditional ties with Russia, and also strategically, the two countries, they understand each other, they support each other, mostly because both of them face the pressure from the West. Russia, they would say there's NATO eastward expansion. For China, you face Quad, US, India, Japan, Australia, allied together against China, and you have AUKUS, so China understands the situation Russia is in. On the other hand, China, hates instability. China doesn't like to see actions like this. Obviously, this is against the principle of the UN. China respects. That's a part of Chinese foreign policy. Obviously, principle, respect sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Chindwa, then why are we seeing, if there is this concern at the instability, why are we not seeing a stronger line from China? Why did China abstain from the UN Security Council condemnation of Russia? Why isn't Xi Jinping picking up the phone to his good friend Vladimir Putin? They've described each other as best friends, and saying, stop this now. Why are we not seeing more action like that?
Even China condemned this action publicly. Russia will continue to do so because Russia thinks that's in their fundamental interests. So China, if you look at China, India, and other countries, basically they choose to stay neutral. On one hand, they basically express the regret, and they are not really supportive of such an invasion. But at the same time, they don't want to make Russia uncomfortable internationally. I think the idea is very clear.
But isn't that, by not doing that, isn't that then tacit support or explicit support even for what Russia is doing? Why do we see this no limits pact, as it's being described, this closer relationship between the two powers that the West now is describing as an arc of authoritarianism?
Not really, I would say. This no limit cooperation was talked about way before the joint statement on the eve of the Winter Olympics, basically on February the 4th. I think the Chinese side highlighted that kind of cooperation. Basically, that's a phrase they use. I would say they speak this phrase, emphasize this phrase to the US or to the West, saying that, if the West is really getting up against China, we do have a friend in Russia. It's not really about okay, you can do everything and you have us on your back.
Just finally, Chindwa, there's been a lot of speculation that what we're seeing in Ukraine, we could also see in Taiwan. We once again have heard from China that they reserve the right to use military force to reunify Taiwan. We've seen an increase in military exercises, both in their scope and their scale and their frequency over the past year. Is that still a possibility? Is there the likelihood of what we're seeing in Ukraine right now also playing out in Taiwan with a Chinese invasion?
Well, interesting questions that you mentioned. I know a lot of people compare the two situations, and for the Chinese government, they don't like to compare that. They say, of course, the official position, Taiwan is part of China. This is completely different from Ukraine, which is a sovereign nation. And I want to remind your audience, of course, like Australia, the US, or any English-speaking country, you can check your foreign policy toward China. Taiwan, there's a one China principle. Taiwan is part of China, and that's very different from Ukraine. But with that being said, I would say a lot of people, when look at the Ukraine situation, people would say, probably we should be really careful about the situation in Taiwan. We just can't afford to see people getting killed, senselessly in a sense, I would say. So we should work harder probably in terms of a peaceful reunification. The situation in Taiwan will largely be dependent on the relationship between China and the United States. If they have a stable relationship, usually the Taiwan question is not a question anymore. Otherwise, it will be a question, and it will be increasingly a challenging question, not only for China, but also for the United States.
Chindwoo, thank you so much for giving us your time. Appreciate your perspective.
Thank you for having me.
The new lunar year is only a little over a month old, a time of celebration, red packets and well wishes for the future. For many Chinese people, it's also a time to visit feng shui masters and fortune tellers in an effort to find out what the year ahead has in store. A practice that's now banned in mainland China due to a government crackdown against so-called feudal superstitions. Our reporter Annie Louie explains.
Around Lunar New Year, it's common for people in China to use these fortune-telling sticks to see what's coming up in the year ahead. You shake them, and whichever one comes out first is going to tell you your fortune. I got 56. Korea. You're going to have a wildly popular sitcom, and audiences are going to love it. Amazing. Knew it. As well as using fortune sticks, every year I receive a personal prediction from a fortune teller in China. Stop it. It's true. Okay. Bye-bye. Unfortunately, I couldn't show you the fortune teller's face because the Chinese government is cracking down on what they're calling feudal superstitions. Fortune telling, known as Swanming or fate calculating, has a long history in China, going back over 1,000 years. It became mainstream during the Ming dynasty in the 15th century until Mao came to power and banned the practice. After Mao died, fortune telling had a bit of a revival, but in recent years, the Communist Party has once again warned fortune telling and feng shui disturb productivity, work, and the social order. In fact, a number of high-level Communist Party officials have been caught up in the crackdown, like regional government official Bai Xueshan, who was thrown out of the Communist Party for corruption, including an apparent obsession with feng shui. Edgar Lock-Tin Young is a feng shui master and Chinese astrology expert from Chaoyang. When he was growing up, all of this stuff was very much on the down low.
I heard, they were not allowed to practice, and they burn a lot of, these books. Feng Shui or Chinese astrology book. But in the smaller village, there's still a lot, they practice, secretly. Yeah.
Edgar says Feng Shui, which literally translates to wind and water, is an environmental science which can be used to invite good luck into our lives.
I think human being, we all want good luck. No one wants bad luck. Yeah, like for example, someone, they say they don't believe in Feng Shui. I would say, okay, if you let me do the Feng Shui for your house, but in the opposite way, don't bring you good luck, but bring you bad luck, would you do it? Most of the time they won't do it. That means they believe, right?
Despite the attempts to quash them, superstitions are still very much part of daily Chinese life. You might have heard that it's bad luck to wash your hair or sweep the floor during Lunar New Year, or you wash away good fortune. And the number 4, or 4, is bad because it sounds like the word death. Or the number 8, Ba, which is lucky because it rhymes with Fa, which means to get rich. In fact, organisers of the Beijing Olympics took it so seriously, the opening ceremony began at 8:08 p.m. on the 8th of August 2008. Superstitions are also heavily tied in with the Lunar New Year cycle, which has 12 to 13 months, meaning the date of the new year is constantly changing. It also means I get 2 birthdays. Score! Each year is also represented by one of 12 animals. We're now in the year of the water tiger, which sounds rad, but will it be lucky?
Water is healthcare, water is fear as well. So I would say the first half of the year, like from now to July, August, the water is still a bit more dominant. But after the second half, the tiger energy kick in. Tiger is the birthplace of fire. So after second half of the year, people will be more happier because fire is joy, fire is happiness.
What would you say is a prediction for me as a water rooster?
There's 2 very good stars coming in for you. One is called the Ziwei. Ziwei is the emperor or name fame. Your name and fame will be better. And also there's another star called the Heaven Kitchen.
Sounds like a great restaurant name.
Yes, and they cook good food, right? So you will have a lot of opportunity to have good food.
Awesome.
And Annie Louie joins us now live from Melbourne. Annie, how seriously do you take these superstitions in your family?
My family takes it extremely seriously. When I was growing up, we could only wear lucky colours. For instance, I also had to buy special food before going to the house for Lunar New Year, and my friend wasn't allowed in unless she bought a certain amount of oranges. So for instance, lucky numbers like 3 or 6 or 8 oranges. And even now, my mum believes that you shouldn't wash your hair on certain days, and she takes it all the way to not washing it on a full moon or a new moon. And I asked Master Edgar if this was just our family or if it was a cultural thing, and he said it's just us.
Now, I understand that Master Edgar has a message for me. I might be a bit tentative about this, but anyway, go.
Yeah, I thought it'd be a bit selfish of me not to bring in a prediction for you too, Stan. So I have found out that you were born in the year of the water rabbit. My mother and sister are both rabbits, so I know them very well. And you might have heard that every year also has an element associated with it, so water, wood, fire, earth or metal. So this for you, wood and fire years are particularly good luck. So they energise you, and some lucky years are ones that end with 4, 5, 6 or 7, as well as dog, pig and goat years are great for you too. So based on that, 1994 and 95 was a great year for your name and your fame, which is also when you happened to win a Logie. So that checks out. Yep. 2015 was a pure wood year, and it was also when you won a Media Peace Award from the United Nations. So that checks out too.
You know far too much about me.
Yeah, Edgar does. He did his research. So looking forward to the next 20 years, they're going to be great for you because apparently the wood's just going to keep popping up and you'll get more famous and your reputation will keep growing and you're going to be very influential both here locally and internationally as well. Some downsides though in terms of your health, your liver and gallbladder are weak areas apparently, so drink moderately and avoid very fatty foods.
But the good news is I'm going to live for the next 20 years apparently.
Yeah, apparently.
I'll take that one to the bank. Thank you, Annie.
No worries. Thanks, Dan.
Finally tonight, the case of the missing WeChat account. Long thought to be a useful platform to engage with Chinese Australians, politicians from both sides of the aisle have been cultivating a presence on WeChat for the last few years. And before we play the story, just to note that our reporter tonight is appearing under a pseudonym as a Uyghur reporter who lives in exile in Australia. He works under the pseudonym Yvonne for the safety of his family back in China. Here's his story.
Up until recently, Scott Morrison had around 75,000 followers on WeChat. Followers that received regular updates from the Prime Minister in an effort to engage with members of the Chinese Australian community. But in late January, that all changed when the account was suddenly no more. In its place was a new account called Australian Chinese New Life, which would provide everyday information for the Australian Chinese community. Several cabinet ministers and MPs were quick to accuse the Chinese government of hacking the account.
I think it constitutes foreign interference in our democracy, which is why I'm calling for all Australian politicians to boycott the platform.
I think there's no evidence to prove that the account has been hacked or hijacked or the foreign interference involved, and there are different political departments. They also deny that the account has been involved in certain kind of foreign interference.
Fan Yong is an expert on WeChat, and her PhD thesis explores WeChat official accounts in Australia. She says they're exclusive and not easy to get.
G'day Australia, some great news.
So when the PM's account was registered in early 2019, there were a few hoops to jump through.
Get the whole country together again. We can open...
To get a WeChat official account, a foreigner outside China, they need to register under a valid Chinese national ID. So to get a WeChat official account for Scott Morrison, his campaign team outsourced this kind of service or labour to a Chinese marketing agency in Australia. That Chinese marketing agency in Australia, they are able to get a valid Chinese national ID and register an account under the name of Mr. G.
I think how it's being reported and how it's being painted by some politicians may not necessarily be accurate. How the Prime Minister registered his WeChat account was a risky proposition to start with.
In January, the real owner of the Prime Minister's account, a Chinese citizen known only as Mr. Ji, decided to sell the account to a new owner, which is how the subscribers were transferred to the Australian Chinese New Life profile. The PM's original account would have then been automatically dissolved. The account never actually belonged to him, due to the way it was set up in the first place. But that doesn't mean there aren't concerns about use of the platform.
Apparently it's been reported that the person or the organisation who has acquired the Prime Minister's account did so without influence from other governments. But I think overall what we do need to keep in perspective is that it does censor articles and posts that are sensitive in nature to the Chinese party state.
And this has happened before. One of the PM's posts was deleted off the platform back in 2020. It's not just the Prime Minister using WeChat to engage with Chinese Australians. Several Liberal MPs, the opposition leader Anthony Albanese, and the Victorian Premier Dan Andrews all have a presence on the platform.
Its dilemma facilitates access to information. You know, as a first-generation migrant, your access to information to your local community really allows you to integrate into the mainstream society. Without WeChat, that can be quite problematic. But on the other hand, it poses, various legitimate concerns of security risk, censorship issues.
For the past couple of years, we have witnessed concerns over Hong Kong pro-democracy protest, human rights issues in Hong Kong, human rights issues in Xinjiang cotton and slavery labor, and also South China Sea controversies. And also Taiwan issues. Because of Australian government's misaccusation of Scott Morrison's missing account and misattribute this incident to China's foreign interference, and it might cause negative impact on Australians' legitimate concern over China's human rights issues and other political, social affairs where China has significant involvement.
You just said a bunch of keywords that would have alarmed the censors on WeChat. Would you have spoken candidly if you were conducting this interview over WeChat?
Well, I have a personal policy that I do not communicate anything political on WeChat, so I wouldn't feel comfortable if the interview conducted on WeChat.
So I think it does open to question, the potential capabilities, knowledge base that those who are in government have about things that are important to Chinese Australians, but also this super app that is WeChat.
And that's all we have on this week's show. Next week, we'll explore attempts to cut food waste in China. And Annie Louie takes a look at the popularity of the piano. I'm Stan Grant. Have a great night.